Hello, this is Coding Gicha for full-stack developers. I'll install NGINX as a web server. The NGINX Web Server offers higher performance than the Apache HTTP Server, supports the latest technologies quickly, and has advantages such as module decoupling. The Windows version of NGINX uses a limited set of methods, so it's not expected to deliver high performance or scalability. Furthermore, it remains in beta mode due to known issues that have not yet been resolved. I recommend using NGINX on the Linux operating system. On Linux, you can install NGINX using the package manager via the repository. On Ubuntu, you can simply install it with apt. Installing from the repository provided by your Linux distribution may result in a slightly older version than the latest version. Ubuntu 24.04 LTS installs NGINX 1.24. Since NGINX 1.25 supports HTTP 3, you must register an additional repository to install the latest version of NGINX. However, if you install from the repository provided by NGINX, the structure of the NGINX configuration directory will be slightly different. Since HTTP 3's primary feature is maintaining connections even when the Internet IP address changes, it may not offer significant differences compared to HTTP 2 for general services other than video services. Unless there's a specific reason, you probably don't need to go through the trouble of adding a repository. Let's check by accessing localhost in a web browser. The welcome message confirms that NGINX has been properly installed. Let's move to the default document root directory. Let's open the index file. The information we saw when accessing localhost earlier is included. The document root management directory is /var/www. The default document root is the HTML subdirectory, and host-specific document roots are typically subdirectories of that name. However, I personally prefer /var/web as the document root management directory. Currently, I'm only using one domain, gicha.org. However, since I can service multiple domains simultaneously, I'll create a directory for each primary domain and manage secondary domains as subdirectories. Due to time constraints, I'll skip configuring the www secondary domain and only configure the gurum secondary domain. I'll unpack the compressed file I've already created and distributed. The web server's process user and group are www data. If you configure a lem stack, the process user and group of PHP are also www data. If you want to create files programmatically, it's recommended to use the www data account for the document directory. I've created two host directories, www.gicha.org and gurum.gicha.org. You need to register the hosts in DNS, but in the development environment, only your local PC needs to recognize the hosts so you can register them in the hosts file. For the development environment, I prefer to use the production hostname +-dev. This makes it easy to distinguish between the development and production web applications and allows for simultaneous development and comparison. Linux web servers natively support serving multiple sites through virtual hosts, managing each site separately in a separate file. Based on the default host configuration file, I'll create configuration files for www.gicha.org and gurum.gicha.org. While using different host addresses to distinguish between the development and production environments, using the names used in the production environment for the remaining configurations minimizes modifications during deployment after development is complete. Since multiple domains can be used together, the site-specific configuration files will also be named using a pattern that connects the primary and secondary domains with a dash, allowing them to be grouped by domain during searches. Due to time constraints, I will only properly modify the configuration file for gurum.gicha.org. To focus on the configuration, I'll remove the comments. Since I've copied the default host configuration file, it contains the default server-related settings and an example virtual host configuration is commented out at the end. I'll modify it based on the default host. Originally, the default host would have general settings, and each virtual host would override certain settings. However, these days, it's essential to serve web applications with TLS security certificates, so the default host is practically meaningless. Since I'll be integrating with PHP later, I've left the PHP configuration comments intact. Since I'll be using this as a virtual host configuration file, I'll delete the default server. The IPv4 and IPv6 ports are set to port 80. If IPv6 is disabled on the server, you'll need to remove the IPv6 settings to avoid errors when running NGINX. I'll move the server name to the front to easily distinguish between hosts. I'll set the server name to gurum.gicha-dev.org. I'll modify the web document root directory to match the host. I'll leave only the index.html file as the index file. Due to the unique implementation of gurum.gicha.org, rewrite settings are required. Since gurum.gicha.org is implemented as a SPA, I use the .gig extension to virtually distinguish page addresses. I'm also developing using less in TypeScript, and when serving, these files are transpiled into CSS and JavaScript, respectively. I manage the configuration files for all sites in the Sites Available directory, and only those sites that will be actively served are linked to the Sites Enabled directory by symbolic links. For sites you do not want to use, simply delete the symbolic link. I'll reload NGINX. NGINX can quickly reflect configuration changes with a simple reload, rather than a restart. Let's access gurum.gicha-dev.org using a web browser. Gurum Gicha is currently in service and plans to offer more cloud services. In the Coding Gicha Cloud category, I'll explain in detail how the features provided by Gurum Gicha were implemented, starting with the source code. The HTML editor is a jig time module, but all other features are implemented in natural JavaScript without a separate module. I'll explain more features as I add them. The Open Graph Protocol is a technology that provides a preview of a page using HTML meta tags. It's used when displaying links on social networks or messengers. I wanted to be able to send links with a preview of the page instead of just a plain link address when sending emails, so I implemented an OGP function in gicha that allows copying and pasting. Gicha's OGP is implemented server-side in PHP. Next time I'll explain how to integrate PHP with NGINX and complete the OGP functionality. Thank you for watching.